the reading's going to be taken from Colossians 3. It's just a few verses. But before I do that, I want to tell you about a very quick experience many years ago that happened to me when I was about 19. So, which relates to this reading. So, I was at home one day and I came out of my body all of a sudden. A completely sovereign, arbitrary act of God. I hadn't done anything previously. I hadn't just been praying hard or fasting or doing anything of this nature. I was just there at home in a perfectly normal frame of mind, just like I am now. And all of a sudden on the right hand side of my head, what felt like a knot just loosened and just swirled loose, and I floated out of my body to the right. And I got out, if my head's here, I got out about like this much, about 1.5 foot, something like that. But it frightened me because I was losing control. So I didn't know what was happening, where I was going. It felt like I was evaporating into everythingness or nothingness. Like they were the same thing. And if I'd have just trusted for maybe 1/2 of a second longer, I'd have been gone and I wouldn't have been able to get back. Not by my making it happen anyway. So I was frightened, so I pushed what I did, and this is the reason I say this, because we're going to do the opposite of what I did, because I made a big mistake there. So what I did, I intuitively knew that in order to get back into my body, I had to focus on something physical. So there was these sheets with like this floral pattern right there next to me, and I just really focused on the flowers or whatever pattern there was on the sheet. And I just focused on it hard with my eyes. Because your spirit man has eyes, you can still see, even though I was out of my body at this point. Or I was sort of, the connection was still there, but if my head was here, I'd come out like about 1 foot, like I said. So I was looking at these sheets and this pattern, and I really, really focused on it hard, and that had the effect of pushing me back towards the left, and I got back in my body, and it was all over in seconds. So if I'd have trusted in God that day, He would have taken me to heaven. He would have shown me heaven. And He would have put me back in my body. They weren't going to find me dead the next day or anything like that. He would have, I've got full confidence looking back at it now, in hindsight, that everything would have been fine. But for that exact moment, I wasn't able to trust. I was too frightened by it all, losing control. That was the thing, I was losing control, you see. And that's what frightened me. That's what frightens us all into it. And so it was all over. But what we're going to do the reverse of that. Because all I had to do to defeat God, in inverted commas, you don't want to defeat God. But all I had to do in order to do that was to focus on the physical. And that had the effect of pushing me back in the body. So we're going to reverse that. We're going to do a live demonstration, if you're all willing, in a bit, halfway through this sermon, this message. It's not going to be a long message. And we're going to focus on the spiritual, not the physical. So I'm just going to read a quick few verses to you. Turn in your Bibles to Colossians 3 if you've got a Bible. It says, "If ye then be risen with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ sitteth on the right hand of God. Set your affection on things above, not on things on the earth. For ye are dead, and your life is hid with Christ in God. When Christ, who is our life, shall appear, then shall ye also appear with him in glory." So that's the text that we're going to just look at for a moment. So I'm going to pick one word out of those few verses I just read there that I'm going to focus on. What do you think that word might be? No? It could be any. There's so many key words in that. Every word of God is perfectly, precisionally put there, isn't it? No.
Risen.
No.
Christ.
No.
So it's not glory either.
What's the question again?
What? I'm just going to focus on one word. What word do you think that might be?
Life.
No.
Peter.
God.
No.
Honor.
Okay,
Infection.
I'm going to tell you.
Rise.
It could be any one of those. You could preach a sermon on any one of those words that you just said there. You could preach a sermon and live a life based upon them. But the word I'm going to pick is the word set,
Okay.
which could mean, there's many different definitions of the word set. So in this context here, the word set means a chemical reaction has to take place. Let's say that there was a man and his whole future hinged on the fact that he had to move a boulder away from a certain area that was blocking his destiny, let's say. And all he had to do was just lift that boulder, just shove it to one side. But let's say it was just a few percent higher than his 1 rep max, so he can't move it. It was very close, but a miss is as good as a mile, isn't it? So he tries to lift it the first time, the boulder, and he can't lift it. And he knew he tried his very best that time. So he's thinking to himself, well, I tried my very best. And you know when you're doing your very best, don't you? You feel it, don't you? Every drop of your strength is going into that. Just like if you're sprinting, you know when you're doing 99%, you know when you're doing 100%, don't you? And he gave it 100% and he failed. And therefore he thinks to himself, well, that's it now, my destiny, I can never find my destiny because that boulder, I have to remove that boulder because that is blocking my destiny. He knows that, and let's say that's true. He has to get rid of that boulder. But let's say that he'd never heard of the concept of the fact that you can actually get stronger by doing repetitions. Let's say he never heard of that. No one had ever taught him about muscle building. He never knew anything about this. So he wouldn't realise, would he, that all he would have to do would just be to lift some lighter weights over and over, things that he can lift, and just do that for even just a couple of weeks or whatever, because it's only just beyond his range, and he'd be able to move that boulder. But if he wasn't aware of that, he'd live his entire life not trying again, wouldn't he? Because he knew that he gave it his best, but it was a few percent higher than his best. I'll give you another analogy, because Jesus was very parabolic, wasn't he? How many parables did he speak? Endlessly, didn't he? Because he's always trying to show that the way it is in the spirit realm is the way it is in the physical realm. That's why God's created the physical realm as a mirror for the spirit realm, so that you're continually shown how God works through the physical world that He's made. Let's say that instead of moving the boulder, let's say your destiny hinged upon you being able to put 2 objects together, like two planks of wood. Let's say that you had to build a certain machine part or something you had to build, and these 2 planks of wood had to be joined together, and there's some glue there. So he puts them together. Someone told him that this glue, if you put the glue in between the 2 blocks of wood, it will stick and you can build the thing and everything will work. Then you have the thing that will enable you to fulfill your destiny. So he puts it together and he tries to pull it apart to see whether they've stuck, and of course they pull apart. Because they do pull apart. If you just put them together and pull it straight apart, it's going to pull apart, isn't it? Let's say that he wasn't aware of the fact, just like that man moving that boulder, that it's not the fact that the glue's faulty, the glue works. But he's not aware of the fact that a chemical reaction has to take place between the glue and the wood in order for this thing to work. And if he'd have just held it there for just even a minute, then it would be bonded. Just like that man, if he'd have just done a few other reps for a couple of weeks, he'd be able to move that boulder. So their lack of knowledge then would forever bar their destiny from ever coming to pass, wouldn't it? If that's all they needed to do is to understand that your muscles will grow stronger and glue will chemically bond to things. In this verse here, the word set, so let's just read that one verse again, Colossians 3:2. It says, set your affection on things above, not on things on the earth. So when I had that experience, that out-of-body experience, I set my eyes on the sheet, the pattern. It was just some ornate pattern on a sheet, and that put me back in my body. That's all I had to do, just to connect myself to the physical. So what we're going to do in a moment, we're going to do the opposite of that. We're going to connect ourselves to the spiritual of God, and we'll do a live demonstration for us all to do. If I'll give you one last analogy, and then we'll do it. Okay. So let's say that I had a game for you to play, and let's say that just like that glue has to be bonded and that boulder has to be lifted, let's say that in order to fulfill your destiny, it wasn't about removing a boulder or gluing wood together. It was about, let's say it was about holding a golf ball. That's all you had to do to fulfill your destiny, right? But you always had to hold this golf ball 24/7. every day of your life, in one hand or the other. You could hold it in your mouth if you wanted to. As long as you hold it, as long as it's on your person and it does not touch the ground. No, you can't put it in your pocket. You have to connect with it yourself. There's no
Hand.
There's no easy way around it. You have to
Grip it, whichever.
No, let's say that God's made the rules to be that there's no trick way out like that. You have to hold it through your own choice. You can hold it in either hand. You can swap it around. It's only a golf ball. It's not heavy and it's not bulky. But you do have to hold it all the time, and this is the game. And as long as you can hold that golf ball in your hand, your whole destiny in God is just going to be fabulously fulfilled. And even when you're asleep, when you can't control what happens, you have to still go to bed with the golf ball in your hand, wrapped tightly around your hand so you don't fall. Because let's say that the stakes are, if that golf ball falls, you die and go to hell forever.
You have to start it around together, go to sleep, won't you?
So he wants to take that challenge. He would want to take a challenge like that.
What, more than a golf ball for a turn?
No, you wouldn't want to take that challenge, would you? But let's say the stakes were a little lower. Let's say the stakes were lower. Let's say that if you drop the ball, you don't go to hell, you still go to heaven.
Yeah.
But you do die
Right.
the moment you drop it to the earth.
Okay.
Now who wants to take that challenge? No?
No.
It's only a golf ball, it's only
I
light.
will, 'cause I put a glove over it.
Let's say that when you fall asleep, because it's got to be 24/7, remember? It's got to be constant. So when you fall asleep, let's say that God gives you a miracle and he glues it to your hand when you're asleep, so that even if you're tossing and turning, it doesn't fall out your hand. Right? But the moment you awake, it's all on you again. There's no miracle now. You have to choose to hold that thing in your hand. You can swap hands with it. You can, as long as you're holding it at all times. Or if it falls to the ground, you die. So nobody wants to take that challenge now. No. Well, let's say that golf ball is not a golf ball. Let's say it's a God ball.
Okay.
Right? In fact, let's say it's God. Let's say it is God.
Okay.
And your eternity does depend on keeping hold of God, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because if you ever let go of God permanently and walked away from him, you would be going to that other place.
Yeah.
But let's say that some people, the Bible talks about some people who, they don't commit the sin unto death, but they do have their life cut short by sin. They still followed God they were still close enough to him. They still loved him, and but they didn't live a long life that they should have done because they weren't as close enough to him. So they went to heaven early, let's say. Let's say that God ball that you've got to hold all the time, let's say that what that is you maintaining your awareness of God. That's all it is. Just like you could choose to hold that golf ball. It's not heavy, it's not bulky, but it is very hard to hold it all the time, isn't it? Even though it wouldn't be a problem for you to hold it for a minute, but doing it the whole time, it's the length of time, isn't it? Time defines things on the earth, doesn't it? If you think of the worst pain in the world that you could have, it wouldn't mean a thing to you if it was just for 1/10 of a second, would it? It also wouldn't mean a thing to you if you had like a wonderful beach holiday in Barbados and you had a sunset and a nice drink, but it wouldn't be any good if it was just for half a second, would it? Things are determined. The pleasure or the pain. Time is a great definer, isn't it? Right? It reveals so many things to us, and time is the same for us all. The moment we're born, the hourglass sand turns upside down and we're all running out of grains, aren't we? And it's the same for us all. Whether you're rich or poor, an hour for you is the same as an hour for me. And so what we're going to do, this live demonstration that I'm trying to get at, is the fulfillment of this verse where it says set. That's the key thing, is set. Just like that concrete on that building site. Concrete is very, very strong, isn't it? It's super strong. But it's not super strong if you mix it and then you mess around with it after a few minutes, because it's not been set yet. The chemical reaction hasn't taken place. And if you didn't know any better, you would just walk away thinking, this is just mush. It's not going to, how can I build a building with this? But then some wise builder through experience came along and he said, no, if you just leave it there for a while, don't fiddle around with it. Just make it in the shape that you want it and then just let it set, and you'll find it will become super strong, and you can build an entire skyscraper with it. You can build your destiny with with that spiritual concrete, as long as you let it set. The timing is the defining factor here. No matter how pleasurable or how painful something is, wouldn't mean anything if it was just for a split second, would it?
No.
So what we're going to do, we're going to hold, imagine like God is like that golf ball, right? That God. You're going to hold on to him. We're all going to do it now for just 1 minute, right? And it's going to be, try to make it a perfect minute of what I'm trying to describe is not praying to him necessarily. That's not what it is. That's not what I'm talking about. It's maintaining your awareness of him.
Yeah.
God already knows what you think, but you don't know what he thinks. So in that dynamic, who should be the listener and who should be the speaker? So what we're going to do, we're going to spend a minute in a moment and see if you can spend 1 minute. You don't have to close your eyes. You don't have to be in silent. You could go and make a cup of tea during that minute. As long as, just like with that golf ball, do whatever you want. Do a skydive if you want. As long as you hold on to that golf ball. That's all you got to do. So if you find it easier to maintain your awareness of God whilst staying still and silent with your eyes closed, then you would do that, wouldn't you? Just like if I was learning to play the guitar for the first time, you would be so focused on them strings, you would look at nothing else. Once you become proficient, you could read a book whilst playing, or talk whilst playing, or look at the sky whilst playing. You'd sing, you could do other things, couldn't you? But whilst you're learning, it's easier to just focus on that one thing, isn't it? So we're going to spend a minute now doing the opposite of what backed me out of going to third heaven, no less. We're going to maintain a perfect minute, if you can do it, of perfect awareness of God's presence. You don't have to be talking to him. You don't have to be silent. You could be doing anything in the world, as long as you maintain your awareness of him for 1 minute. You ready?
Yeah.
Begin. So did you manage it?
It's difficult. You do sort of go off, don't you?
Yeah.
I did sort of manage it. I started thinking about.
I did in the first couple of seconds, man.
I am really
But
tired.
going back to
I'm
it.
up very early and I'm tired, so I'm struggling a little bit, I'll be honest.
Yeah. So what about if I said we're going to do another 5 minutes right now?
Yeah, wake me up when it's over.
No, we're not going to do it. Right. I just wanted to see what your reaction would be. We're not going to do another 5 minutes. We're not going to do another 5 minutes, right? You've got to do a lifetime of that.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to do in my life, is to do this verse. Set. It means a chemical reaction has to take place. That interface between your soul and the Spirit of God has to chemically bond. You know, it's like the opposite of demon possession. Because when a person drifts into sin, what they're doing, they're interfacing with demon powers, and those demons are putting a chemical reaction, just like between the glue and that wood. Particles are interacting and bonds are being formed, so that when that person then tries to live the rest of their life, they've got another entity expressing its desires through them, and they don't even realize that it's not them.
Yeah.
But the opposite can happen. You can be taken over by the Spirit of God too. And that's what we've got to do, isn't it? We have to set our affection on him. So what I would encourage everybody to do is, even if you could just do even just a few minutes a day of that, where you try to maintain your awareness of him, even if you're dealing with your children or doing the dishes or driving to work or wherever you're doing, you don't have to be sat there in silence. That's the key. It all depends on how much time. It's like anything. Every good guitarist has one thing in common. They could be tall, fat, thin, black, white. They don't have those things in common. They don't have anything of those things in common, but one thing they all have in common without exception is that they all spent huge amounts of time on it all the time. So the thing that this does as well, when I said maintaining our awareness of God, how would you know that you're coming to God for him rather than what he can do for you? Rather than what blessings that he does want to give you, that's true. But how would you prove to God, how would God know if you're coming to him not just for the blessings, for the physical things that you want?
Being obedient, praying and worshipping.
I'll just
By praising him.
Well, you would do it if you came. This is the only way you could do it. is to come to him without asking him for anything,
You have to know.
with no agenda.
You have to know who
Yeah.
you are in him, what he has done for you.
So this is my whole point, is that you could be, like you just talked about, praising God then, but it's not God's will for us to be praising him literally 24 hours a day, is it? I mean, literally singing a song to him 20. It's not literally his will 24/7 for us to be praying to him in words, although there'll be times for that. It's not literally his will for us to be doing anything 24/7 other than actually loving him. And that's what I mean when I talk about awareness of his presence, choosing to be aware of him, because that's your love for him then, because you're not coming to him asking him for something. You're coming to him just for him, and that's the only way you can know that you are coming to him for him, is when you don't ask him for anything, is just to bask in him and say, God, I'm choosing to be aware of you, just for your sake. That's the key, and that is what we should do 24/7. It's almost indefinable, isn't it? That's why I give the analogy of a golf ball. It's just holding on to something, making contact with that ball. It's just having contact with God. It's choosing to be aware of him. It's choosing to be aware of him. But it's not easy to do. It's a discipline, because you do lose that connection very easily. You have to 100% consciously, voluntarily choose it. It never chooses itself.